En la noche tenemos
ranas. Color on their hips. It's like green and light blue.
Yeah, it's like fluorescent.
Yeah, and some think it's in the armpits as well. Nope, that's not the one I wanted. His chin's a bit dark. And then it's like they're all in their little own apartment. This já vai
I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and you're watching Middle East Now. Well, it looks like former U.S. President Donald Trump has survived a second assassination attempt. The incident happened while the former U.S. president was at his golf club in Florida, and we have all of the details for you in this report.
The Secret Service thwarted an apparent assassination attempt on Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump while he was golfing at his West Palm Beach course in Florida. Several agents fired at a gunman armed with an AK-47 style assault rifle, who was hiding in bushes some 400 to 500 yards away from Trump.
It was 1 or 2 holes behind. That because the bubble moves through the golf course, so our agents will get there first, clear it. He noticed that the rifle was pointed out. Our agents engaged. We are not sure right now if the individual was able to take a shot at our agents, but for sure our agents were able to engage with the subject. I don't know that. Doesn't appear so.
The suspect fled in a vehicle and was later arrested.
I wouldn't say it was extremely sophisticated, but it certainly wasn't, an amateur attempt. He had made there was some level of planning that went into this.
The suspect was identified as 58-year-old Ryan Wesley Ruth from Hawaii, according to anonymous law enforcement officials. His social media posts indicate that he voted for Trump in 2016, but was later disappointed and wrote he, quote, "will be glad when you gone." Routh also tried to recruit Afghan soldiers to fight in Ukraine and spent several months in the country.
My initial goal was to come and fight. Plan B was to come here to Kyiv and promote getting more people here. We need thousands and thousands and thousands of people here fighting with the Ukrainians.
Ruth shared COVID-19 conspiracies online and has a history of mental illness. He also shared anti-Israel posts and appears to believe Jews have no right to the Holy Land. Meanwhile, Donald Trump took to his own social media to reassure his supporters and thank the law enforcement for swift action. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris denounced the attack. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Isaac Herzog expressed relief that the attack failed and condemned political violence. The apparent attempt on Trump's life comes just 2 months after he was shot at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania, sustaining a minor injury to his right ear. With just over 7 weeks until the presidential election, the need for heightened security remains a critical concern in the polarized political climate in the United States.
Well, joining us now is our U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. Mike, the U.S. has a history of not only attempted assassinations, but also successful assassinations of American leaders. What could this latest attempt mean for Trump in the polls?
I'm not quite sure it's really going to have an effect one way or another in the polls. If you'll remember a few months back, the assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania, the pictures that came out of that with Trump having his fist pumped in the air, blood dripping from his ear, that was supposed to be game over for the election. And then a couple weeks later, everything changed. Nobody even remembers saying it at that point, that was the end of the election right there, that Trump had essentially clinched it with his showing in the aftermath of that assassination attempt. This one, obviously, less dramatic. shouldn't be minimized in any way, of course, the seriousness of it, but less dramatic in the sense that it's going to hold the news cycle for as long as the last one did. I don't think it's going to have any effect one way or another in the polls. Whoever was going to vote for him following the last attempt is going to vote for him still, and whoever wasn't. There are other things under consideration right now for voters beside this. Again, doesn't negate the seriousness of the situation at all. Presidential candidate undergoing 2 assassination attempts in an election cycle, unheard of in anything outside of a banana republic situation.
Right. I mean, obviously there are a lot of questions as to what is happening with the U.S. Secret Service at this point. There seems to be some serious gaps here. 2 attempts like that. We're talking about the barrel of a gun sticking out of a bush, really not so far away from the former American president. So I imagine there is a discussion right now as to what is going to take place in terms of strengthening American security.
There have been some long-running problems with the Secret Service. A number of scandals have engulfed the agency over several years now. Some of them in and out of the news cycle in terms of agents who were drunk on the job, who got caught doing things in foreign countries, breaking the law, having to return early to the United States. And obviously, with what transpired on January 6th and whether or not they were listening to the president at the time as he instructed them to drive onto the Capitol, and they refused. They've been in the news cycle way too much for an agency that has secret in its name. The agency's director resigned in the aftermath of the last assassination attempt and the Secret Service's failure to protect the president in this situation. They're now under an interim director. President Biden commented earlier today that the Secret Service needs more help. We presume, though he didn't expound on those comments, we presume he means more resources, but that's not really under, presidential overview at this point. Congress once again is involved. They'll be briefed today, and the Secret Service probably needs more of a revamp that can happen than just in this current election season. Probably when a new president takes over the White House, I think the agency will undergo a colonoscopy of sorts and try to figure out how it can better serve not only the candidates, but I think the American populace at large here by making it feel like a safe environment. Nobody should be going to rallies or being around candidates and having to fear for their lives at the same time.
All right, that's our senior correspondent Mike Wagenheim joining us from Washington, D.C. with the latest update as to the second attempted assassination of Donald Trump in these elections. We are turning back to Israel. It is day 346 of the Israel-Hamas war, and rumors are swirling in Israeli media outlets that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is maneuvering to fire Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, and not for the first time. At the center of the dispute between the two men is Israel's military strategy regarding the situation on its northern border. And here's our correspondent Robert Swift with more.
An invasion of southern Lebanon by the IDF, pushing hostile rocket launchers further north and away from Israeli towns that have been bombarded for months. This is the plan reportedly being pushed by Israel's top general commanding the northern frontier. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi are reportedly opposed to the idea, favoring a diplomatic approach to the standoff. Concerns over IDF manning levels, while combat continues in the Gaza Strip, the advantage that winter will give a guerrilla force and Hezbollah's formidable missile arsenal could be factors in their position.
The center of gravity is moving northward. Our mission here is not yet done, and that is to change the security situation and return residents to their homes.
But reports in Hebrew media suggest that not only does Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu back the establishment of a buffer zone in southern Lebanon, but that he may fire Gallant for opposing the move, replacing him with Gideon Sa'ar. The two frequently clashed over Israeli strategy in recent months, with Gallant seen as a dependable ally in Washington. In the spring of 2023, Netanyahu fired Gallant during the political upheavals around the Likud-led judicial overhaul, a move he reversed after mass street protests. It is into this latest political mess that the White House's Amos Hochstein arrives for his latest foray to Israel and Lebanon. No doubt he'll be conscious of Israel's last attempt to create a buffer zone inside the territory of its northern neighbor in 1985. While the Palestinian rocket fire was curbed, Israel found itself stuck in Lebanon for 15 years, fighting a counterinsurgency war that ultimately birthed Hezbollah.
Well, joining us now from northern Israel is our correspondent, Zach Anders. Zach, what is the latest on the ground right now?
Well, I'll tell you what, just about 15 minutes ago, probably less than that, 10 minutes or so, we're sitting there and look over to my right, actually just now over my shoulder in this direction, the Mamut and that Naphtali undergoing a rocket alert. And it's not often, I mean, we spend a lot of time up here, but we usually see the rockets coming from the north towards the south, and we're looking this time at rockets coming from the west towards the east. So that correlates a bit with what we were seeing earlier in the afternoon when we saw that IDF activity striking near Hula, which is in this area on the Lebanese side, very close to the border. And now we see rocket fire coming from that direction into the Galilee. So another moment where it appears to be a substantial rocket attack. We counted at least 7 interceptions, but we don't have any reports of damage. And that's the story of the day. While Hezbollah is claiming 9 attacks, we don't have any reports of casualties from these 9 attacks. There might have been some damage. Earlier, I was reporting from right on the border, and we were telling you about the fire that we were seeing, what looked like right on the Lebanon side. The fire, as we've since learned, is right there on the border. But we don't have any substantial reports from the IDF about damage. That's something that we often will never get. They're not going to be revealing any of that information about IDF sites. As far as today goes, the real tension here, as we were touring the north, actually, with British MPs, ministers, and German ministers from those respective parliaments that were brought here by NGO Elnet, which is a nonpartisan NGO that works to bring some of these parliament members into Israel to show them what was happening. As we were touring the north, these ministers were really surprised to see the level of damage in certain areas, especially in the areas where these wildfires have been burning. And it kind of underscores that for people that are outside of Israel that aren't seeing this every day, don't really realize the scope, the scale of what has been taking shape here for 11 months and how much autonomy Hezbollah has had to be able to pepper the north with these daily attacks, largely get away with it. When we were speaking to a few of our sources today, one of them told me that the main concern here is that Hezbollah is really closely watching any political decision that's about to be made or is being made in Jerusalem, and that they could respond the only way they know how: continued rocket fire, continued drone fire, and that's the real concern here tonight, is a Hezbollah attack trying to send a message.
All right, Zach Anders joining us from the north of Israel. Thank you for that update. We're going to turn now to our guests in the studio. We have international affairs analyst Dan Perry joining us, along with Colonel in the Reserves Dr. Jacques Neria, the former foreign policy advisor to former Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin, and our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osran joining us as well. So interesting what Zach had to say towards the end of his update from the north, essentially speaking to the fact that Hezbollah is looking at what's happening in Jerusalem in terms of its decision making. We know that there are reports going around right now that the Prime Minister of Israel is planning to fire current Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. Do these reports hold any sway? Is there any truth to them? And what would that ultimately mean for the country?
Well, you know, it's said, of course, that history repeats itself. First is tragedy, then is farce. Israel already occupied South Lebanon for 18 years. It did not go well. It was an extremely tragic experience. And now we learn that after 11 months and more of ridiculously tolerating nonstop attacks by Hezbollah, instead of organizing a more clever way out of this, the government's plan is to reoccupy southern Lebanon again and remain there in a buffer zone. And not only that,
what would that clever way look like?
Well, to complete the thought, the farce is that this is being done by removing the defense minister, who's the only popular member of the government because he opposes it, and the military also opposes it. The more clever way, I think, would have been from the beginning to internationalize this conflict, to explain that this is Lebanon attacking Israel, it's unacceptable, to organize a global coalition, to have retained the moral high ground that Israel had on October 7th, and to not tolerate it at all. But to create a situation where you have to go in, you have the true backing of the world as opposed to your only ally, the U.S., sending over here an envoy who doesn't even bother with Lebanon, goes only to Israel to pressure Israel not to proceed, which would mean to continue to absorb a year of attacks from Hezbollah, which has hijacked what pretends to be a foreign sovereign country. So, look, from the beginning, Israel chose, instead of a strategic approach to the cataclysm of October 7th, instead using blunt force ineffectively but brutally in Gaza, and using a moderate amount of force equally ineffectively in the north. And I would say the last thing Israel needs in a situation where the 60,000 people in the north are begging to return to their homes is not only an invasion of Lebanon, but an invasion that is being described as something that will last for a long time. Right. You'd think if they go in, they'd make it fast, effective, and elegant.
Jacques, you know, the fears of a wider war with Hezbollah are growing amidst, you know, the infighting that we're seeing in the Israeli government here, and really just the simple fact that it's been almost a year since tens of thousands of Israelis have been evacuated from their homes in the north. At this point, is there any way to avoid a wider scale war?
I'm afraid I'm not giving here a good message, a positive message. I think that we are going to face an imminent war. This is going to happen, I mean, maybe in the next weeks or so, but definitely there's no other way in order for the government to allow the inhabitants to return to their houses. So what sort of action? We have already heard the Minister of Defense saying there will be a ground incursion in Lebanon, and it won't be at anything close to what it was in the past. Means that this area, Lebanon, will have to forget about 10,452 square kilometers, because this is not going to happen anymore. Israel is going to empty, in my view, it's going to empty the area between the Israeli border and the Litani River, and in order to create such a situation where international intervention will come here and create a new order in the area. I don't think that Israel wants to remain in South Lebanon. I think that the idea is, as I said, to secure and in order to initiate a diplomatic movement and compel the Lebanese government, which is right now looking at Hezbollah and doing nothing. So I mean, after all, we are being attacked by a militia, which is not even part of the Lebanese government. It's not even registered at the Lebanese.
Well, the question is whether or not the Lebanese government at this point has any legitimacy.
Well, they have an army, 70,000 soldiers. They can use it, and they didn't use it ever against Hezbollah.
All right, quick response. Very quick.
I do agree with Jacques that a good outcome would be to create a situation where Hezbollah is gone from the south, and what replaces it, if not the Lebanese army, which does exist, is some sort of international force. There's no way Israel can tolerate Hezbollah remaining on the border again.
All right. Well, obviously the question as well right now is whether or not those residents who have been evacuated for so long are even interested in going back to their homes, because we're hearing, you know, reports that a very high percentage think that they might just stay in the center where they are currently evacuated. But we are turning to a different topic right now. Houthi fighters have allegedly arrived in Syria all the way from Yemen, according to reports. Now, this comes after a source told I-24 News that the Iran-backed Yemeni group was on its way to Israel's border with Syria in the Golan Heights. Now, the Houthis claim that their arrival is a, quote, prelude to a new phase of escalation against Israel. And joining us to discuss this is our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Osra. And you've been sitting here, and I've been waiting to basically hear your take on this. I mean, what do we know so far about this alleged movement of Houthi fighters from Yemen to Syria?
So we know, based on a wide array of separate reporting from recent months, that between a few hundred and a few thousand Houthi ground forces have been sent to Syria, mainly to southern parts of Syria, near the border with Israel. Excuse me. They've made their way under false pretenses via Jordan and Iraq. But their goal, and this is what separates them from other thousands of pro-Iranian militias that have been operating for years in Syria, also southern Syria, are these images that we're seeing on the screen. The Houthis have been training and are also telegraphing their training for October 7-like scenario, storming the border in the thousands, taking hostages, killing civilians and soldiers like what we're seeing right now. This is the scenario that they're training for, as opposed to what other pro-Iranian militias in Syria are doing. And the reason why this is raising concern among defense officials in Israel is because also Hamas telegraphed their plans for October 7th. Also, they conducted similar plans, shared the videos. Now, the Houthis and Hamas, they don't train for nothing. Yes, it looks good on TV for propaganda, but they train for military purposes. And the fact that you have pro-Iranian militia, perhaps other than Hamas, the most driven to the cause of all of Iran's proxies, amassing on Israel's quietest front in the north, near the border, telegraphing their intention to carry out October 7th-like rampage into Israel. This is something that does have Israeli security officials.
Okay, when we say amassing, how many fighters, how many Houthi fighters are we talking about here? And what is the IDF's response at this point? What are we hearing from the Israeli government on this matter?
Well, we're not hearing too much, only that they're aware of this trend. We don't have official numbers, reports, and also recent research by the Alma Research Center on this issue does position it, like I mentioned, between a few hundred and a few thousand. Again, the numbers aren't official, and even the Houthis are denying or sending mixed messaging. The most recent report on this came from Russian Sputnik, that when everything has to do with Russia, they have appeared to be fairly credible with everything. So the Israeli army is aware of this. It's, I won't say looking into it, it's preparing its own defenses for it. Again, we didn't hear too much about Israel's preparations, but we do know that the military is aware of this growing threat.
Ariel, just defensive? I mean, I wonder how precisely they know their location, such that they could be preemptively removed.
That would be great, wouldn't it? But there's so many other Houthi sites that in Yemen that Israel hasn't struck, besides the port of Hudaydah. Perhaps it has.
Yeah. And, this seems particularly urgent.
And we don't know. But this ground threat is also what's keeping residents of the north, this ground threat from Hezbollah, keeping the residents of the north from returning. And the border and the northern Golan is perhaps the most reachable.
The irony is that Hezbollah is not attacking deep inside Israel, whereas the Houthis from Yemen are just hitting twice already.
Once one could say they have a lot less to lose.
Well, but I mean, they are, in fact, they feel that they are allowed to hit inside Israel. This is what they are doing. They try to hit Eilat, they try to hit north of Eilat, and they reached the Dead Sea, and now they reached Modi'in, and then you had you had this drone coming from
of course. Hezbollah's defense, Iran also tried to hit central Israel with hundreds of missiles and drones.
But Hezbollah covers it with the premise that they're attacking military sites, whereas the Houthis really just, aim with the understanding that civilian population centers will be hit.
I differ on the goal. I believe that they are meant to penetrate, to infiltrate inside Jordan and take over the border between Jordan and Israel. This is 309 kilometers, problematic for Israel because we don't have their defenses like we have in other borders, and this is where the Iranians are directing the main militias, and we see that the Jordanian army is being deployed there in order to stop this infiltration.
All right, I want to talk about Iran. This is a very important subject that we need to cover as well, Jordan, but let's turn to Iran briefly. Dan, I'm going to come to you shortly. Israel's still awaiting Iran's retaliation on following the assassination of Hamas leader Ismail Khani in Tehran. Now, the Islamic Republic immediately blamed Israel despite having any concrete proof of this, vowing to strike back, but that attack still hasn't happened almost 2 months later. Well, now the deputy chief of the Iranian army for coordination recently visited Beijing to attend the 11th Shengshan Forum, a high-level security and defense forum, and here's what he had to say.
و به کمک گنبد آهنین رژیم صهیونیستی رفتن.
We will not announce in advance our retaliatory actions for Haniyeh's assassination. Since the assassination, the America-led West has sent us a message hoping that Iran would not take any retaliatory action. But there will definitely be a response to Haniyeh's assassination from us. It is just up to us to decide when that is going to happen, and we will make sure that our response is meticulously and well planned.
All right, I'd like to turn back to our guests in the studio. Dan Perry, you specifically, I know that you want to speak on this. Saudi Arabia has been calling for more pressure on Iran as the Houthi threat grows. Are we going to be seeing more international military pressure? Is it time to do that?
I have no evidence that we will, but I think it is time to do that. Look, it's one of the big questions of geopolitics. When do you intervene in another country? Iran ticks every one of the boxes that might justify it. They're horribly oppressive to their own people. They're a danger to the region with all these proxies everywhere. Just spoke about the outrageous Houthis. And they are a danger to the world with their insistence on becoming a nuclear weapon state. So there have been two models in how to deal with them. One has been effort to cajole them into some sort of deal only on the weapons program. That was the Democratic Obama model. And Trump, of course, is the isolationist, let's stay away and hope sanctions do the trick. Talk loudly, carry a very small stick. I think it's time for a third model, where the world basically says the game is up, Islamic Republic. If you want us not to really take strong and immediate action, you need to end the rocket program, hand over your nuclear material, and stop aiding the proxies. Now, I'm not saying they're going to agree and just fold, but if they don't, it's time to threaten credibly and maybe follow through on blockading their ports, destroying their oil fields, certainly destroying their nuclear facilities, and also at local infrastructures, such as to encourage a revolution so that the great people of Iran can finally have a government that is not an international rogue. I think the West needs to simply change the entire approach to Iran and threaten war.
All right. Well, we're going to go out for a quick commercial break here, but when we get back, we're going to be continuing this discussion and more. So do not go anywhere. This is Middle East Now. I'm Natasha Kirchuk. We'll see you soon.
Sale for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayazad.fr.
And we are back on Middle East Now. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for sticking with us. Now, Israel has charged 3 citizens with terrorism offenses for violently attacking Palestinians in the West Bank in August. According to the indictment, the 3 suspects left their homes in the settlement of Itamar after hearing that one of their friends had been attacked by Palestinians on a nearby road, and then attacked multiple Palestinian vehicles, beating the passengers, smashing windows, and throwing rocks. Now, this comes amid an increase in extremist settler attacks against Palestinian civilians since October 7th. Also, Palestinian terror attacks targeting Israeli civilians have been rising as well. But how widespread is this issue? Well, I spoke to our I-24 News senior editor Ali Waked earlier today to go deeper into this. Joining us now is senior I-24 News editor Ali Waked. So, Ali, let's just begin with the basics here. How many settlers are there in the West Bank today?
Officially, we have like 520,000 settlers who are almost 5% of the Israeli population. And a very big majority of these settlers live in 3 main blocks in the region of Jerusalem, mainly the Ma'ale Adumim region, in Ariel in the north of the West Bank, Nablus area, and of course in Gush Etzion in the south of the West Bank in the region of Hebron.
Now, we see quite often these reports coming out of violent settler attacks on Palestinian communities. What percentage of this community are carrying out these attacks? Is this a fringe movement? I mean, how common are they?
Natasha, we know that, for example, in the year 2021, when the police was under the Labour Party minister, Omer Barlev, they prosecute 300 cases, and now the numbers are believed to be between 300 to 400 cases in a year. But these are the official numbers of the Israeli authorities. In these numbers, the Palestinians say, and also human rights organizations say, that these are the big and the severe cases. And in this data, we don't find, for example, cases of sheep theft, cases of uprooting trees in the territories, mainly in the olives season, where we see really tens of cases where settlers try to prevent Palestinians to go into their lands and to collect the olives as a way of the settlers, from the Palestinian point of view, to prevent the economy of the Palestinian to be developed. The Palestinians believe that these actions are not like individual actions, are not like, as we say, marginal elements in the settlements, but a big plan of the settlers, of their leadership, to encourage Palestinians to leave the West Bank. And the truth is that when we see that, for example, only 80 cases of settlers were prosecuted last year, 94 of them were closed. These cases were closed without anyone being charged in these all of the violent cases that took place last year and the year before in the West Bank.
Ultimately, how is the IDF dealing with this situation? I mean, 300 to 400 cases, obviously, when you're looking at that percentage, we're talking about over 500,000 Israelis who are living within the West Bank. A small percentage, but you're obviously referring to a much wider spread issue here. So are there any steps that are being taken by the Israeli government, by the IDF, to try to prevent this?
No, the measures that are taken are aimed to prevent settlers from being accused or from being indicted or from being prosecuted. For example, we see that since the new cabinet, the new government in Israel, with the 2 ministers responsible, one for the National Security Ministry, Itamar Ben-Gvir, and one for the civil aspect of the Ministry of Defense, Bezalel Smotrich, the 2 of them are settlers. The 2 of them say that we want to double the numbers of Israelis living in the West Bank, and they think that the settlers are discriminated against. So they are doing everything. For example, we see an increase in the demolition of Palestinian homes and a very big decrease in the numbers of settlers accused for violence cases against the Palestinians.
Quick question here. Do these leaders, these far-right leaders that you're referring to, Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, have the ability to really make that type of change? They make a lot of noise, but realistically, when we're talking about the power structure of this government, can they actually do this?
No, and the truth is that there is tension between these two ministers and between the army, between these two ministers and between the Shabak, big officers in the army, and the Shabak chairman Bar say and warn that the fact that there is a vibe, that there is an atmosphere that is encouraging what they call nationalistic violence, or another term, Jewish terrorism, is endangering the national security of the State of Israel. And we see, Natasha, the coverage in the international media of these actions of violence. And for the first time, Western countries at their head, the United States, are imposing sanctions over more and more settlers.
All right, I'd like to turn back to our guests in the studio. I want to hear your responses to some of what we heard Ali Waqid say. You know, we're seeing kind of across international headlines this kind of painting of the Israeli public as supportive or somehow complicit in the attacks that we see by extremist settlers in the West Bank. Obviously, the percentage, like Ali said, is very low when you're looking at the overall population that exists in the West Bank, although it is, of course, a very serious issue that Israel must confront. Are these attacks reflective of what the Israeli public believes needs to happen?
Categorically not. First of all, the government maybe has the support of a third of the public at this point. These are minority even within the government. It's impossible to defend what the extremist settlers are doing. The entire security establishment is against it. I don't think the Prime Minister is in favor of it, but the two main ministers that have to do with policing the West Bank and policing the Jews in the West Bank are clearly enablers of this. Well, they may not instigate it, but they clearly are enablers. So the result is that the handling of this disastrous problem that besmirches the entire country has been a very light touch, very forgiving, looking the other way, making arrests where they absolutely have to, but not nearly enough to de-incentivize the radicals that are doing it. And these two ministers, by no means reflecting either the policies of this government and certainly not the people of Israel, but these two ministers in question, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir, represent an extremist fringe in Israel that have dreams of one day the Palestinians being compelled to voluntarily emigrate. And this disastrous allowing of the rampages by extremist settlers, for that reason, is a strategic a danger for Israel itself, as well as being a moral blight and a stain upon the Jewish people.
I can say only one thing, that the situation, security situation in the West Bank is such that the IDF has deployed there more than 25 battalions of the IDF. These battalions equal twice the size of the forces that are today in Gaza. So to give you an idea of the threat that where Israel might face in the West Bank, and it might we might see because of what's going on there, from the violence from the Palestinian side and the violence from the extremist Jews on the other side, we might find ourselves in the third Intifada. And in the third Intifada, 95% of those who live in the West Bank, the Jews who live in the West Bank, are going to be threatened by violence and by terrorism. And this is what's happening on the ground. And the fact is, as Dan said earlier, this government, two main ministers of this government are very much in favor of those extremists, and they're doing all their efforts in order not to punish those people who are responsible. I mean, imagine that since October 7th, the Minister of Defense has issued only four the instructions of arresting four settlers.
One thing that really has to be said is an example of the danger this poses. On October 7th, one of the reasons why the Gaza border was so ill-defended and almost entirely abandoned was because significant forces were moved to the West Bank for the very specific reason that there was not just intelligence, but the knowledge that extremist settlers were trying to stir up trouble. And there was an expectation that the West Bank could explode. Instead, Gaza did.
All right. Well, we're going to have to move on to our next story. Very interesting to hear your analysis. We are turning back to Iran. It is hard to believe, but it has been exactly 2 years since protests broke out across Iran and the world following the murder of Mahsa Amini, an Iranian Kurdish woman who was arrested for failing to properly wear a hijab in Iran and then killed in custody by the Islamic Republic's so-called morality police. But what has changed since then? Well, our producer, Alex Schloss, breaks it down.
2 years since the killing of Mahsa Amini, 2 years since the explosion of the Woman Life Freedom Movement, and 2 years since the bloody crackdown that ensued. On September 16th, 2022, Iran's morality police infamously entered the global spotlight after violently arresting 22-year-old Iranian Mahsa Amini for improperly wearing her hijab as she stepped out of the train station in Tehran. She later collapsed and died while in police custody, 5 days before her 23rd birthday. Eyewitnesses, including those detained with Amini, said she was severely beaten and died as a result.
Our findings showed, based on examination of medical documents and also of pattern evidence of the treatment of women in these situations, that Jina Mahsa Amini's death was an unlawful death, and we believe that the state is responsible.
Amini was born Mahsa Jina Amini to a Kurdish family in northwest Iran. Jina, given to her as her Kurdish name, meaning life. According to friends and family, she was a shy person who minded her own business and steered clear of politics. Shortly after her death, the streets of Iran erupted in anti-government protests, often with young women leading the charge. Some women in Iran were seen cutting their hair, burning their hijabs, while others took their protests to the global arena, competing without hijabs and voicing support for the movement dubbed Woman, Life, Freedom. Even some family members of government leaders voiced their outrage.
اکنون تمامی بشریت در این بره حساس تاریخی ناظر است که انسان‌هایی در ایران با دستان خالی و تنها با تکیه بر جان خیش و دلاوری و رشادتی مثال زدنی، من به عنوان یک زن ایرانی از تمامی انسان‌های جهان می‌خواهم که در این راستا این شیرزنان و شیرمردان را یاری کنند. برای اولین بار در طول تاریخ بشر زنان قدرت نهانی خیش را بر این جامعه مرد سالار دیکته می کنند و با شجاعت تمام نشان می دهند که جایگاه قدرت واقعی در اندیشه است، نه در بازو، و این قدرت مستقل از جنس و رنگ و نژاد است.
Government-aligned forces brutally cracked down on demonstrators, killing over 500 and detaining over 22,000 over the course of the months-long movement. Protesters remained undeterred, but the movement ultimately petered out in the spring of 2023. Since then, multiple others have been sentenced to death in closed-door trials after being accused of killing security personnel. Fast forward to today, and little has changed in the Islamic Republic of Iran, other than a new president, viewed by most as a reformist. But on the second anniversary of the killing of Mahsa Amini, Pezeshkian held his first press conference with no mention of her name, nor the mass uprising that her killing inspired. Amini's death brought a reckoning for Iran's theocratic government that continues till today, and in Tehran, women are still routinely seen without their mandatory headscarves, in protest of the law mandating them. Police have begun detaining and fining women again, but there hasn't been an incident to reignite new protests that could once again threaten the regime's control.
Well, joining us now on Zoom is Camelia Entekabifard, the editor-in-chief of the Independent Persian. So, interestingly, Iranian President Pezeshkian has just come out and essentially said that the morality police are no longer going to bother women anymore. But he held his first presser without mentioning Mahsa Amini's death specifically. So what does this actually mean? And is there any weight to what he's saying?
Thank you, dear Natasha, for hosting, and greetings to everyone. We didn't get surprised. He is part of the system, And he mentioned at his press conferences, the best way to serve this regime is to be obey with the regime's instruction. When they have spoken about the two opposition leader who they are in the house arrest, he says no one should break the law at this country. And not speaking about Mahsa Amini is part of this agenda. They shouldn't talk about the issues Iranian people are confronting. Not only Mahsa, over than 1,000 people during Mahsa's demonstration killed, put in custody, or they lost their eyes, or they get injured. Justice should be for everyone, and Mahsa is the symbol of these justices. And I didn't get surprised when he says there is no morality police. Every single revolutionary guards at this country are the morality police in Iran. And speaking of not having them at the street, it doesn't make sense, because the regime is formed based on having the Islamic law observed in the society.
Now, Mahsa Amini's death sparked protests in Iran and worldwide, but did it actually change anything? Do women in Iran still protest inside the country? And I mean, what kind of changes have we seen on the ground, if any?
Natasha, this protest wasn't only about hijab. Hijab is the symbol of the forces the regime and the oppression the regime is exercising against of 85 million Iranian people. And anywhere, sometimes something becomes a symbol for a fight, right, for a demonstration. And hijab was part of this. The best success I can see during these 2 years of the demonstrations is Iranians who are supporting them outside Iran, which Iranians are nationalists, and they are really serving for the people's interest. We didn't see at the marks of her anniversary lots of these sabotagers, the people who were infiltrated as a spinach among of the demonstrators presenting yesterday in international demonstration against of the system. That was so beautiful. Iranians learned who are with them and who they were just served at this demonstration during 2 years ago for their own interest. That was the most beautiful things we saw, that the unity, the national interest, and also all Iranians for one free and democratic Iran united with each other. I guess this is the best thing comes out of these demonstrations.
All right, Camila, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us, giving us your insight. We are turning now to Turkey. Now, they may have once been enemies, but Egypt and Turkey are now coming together to try and resolve a power struggle in Libya, thanks to their newfound friendship. Libya is on the brink of a civil war amidst a crippling oil blockade, and now both Egypt and Turkey are trying to end it. Well, joining us now to break this down is our guest in studio. Now, or on Zoom, sorry, we have Dr. Sinan Sidia, Senior Fellow on Turkey from the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Now, to begin, break down this crisis in Libya and what has caused it.
Yeah, so this is a long ongoing saga between not just Turkey and Egypt, but Turkey has had a very contentious relationship, almost unique relationship with Libya, dating back for years now to the early 2010s. When it basically essentially recognized the official government of Libya at the time after conflict broke out in the post-Gaddafi space, basically because Turkey was interested in getting a partner that would recognize or work with Turkey to sort of establish maritime zones and its view of how the Mediterranean should look. Not because it was interested in Libya simply because it was a potential ally, but Turkey was essentially looking for somebody who could validate its claims in the Mediterranean as well as energy resources. This contrasted very starkly with Egypt's conception of who essentially should be backed in Egypt in the Libyan space. And given that Turkey and Egypt had fallen out due to Erdogan labeling Sisi administration as a dictatorship that was reminiscent of that came about as a result of a coup. This really, you had two big behemoth governments, both Turkey and Egypt, potentially squabbling over what to do with Libya or what Libya would do to serve their interests. And as you correctly suggest, right now, if that had continued, if the Turkish and Egyptian governments had not, worked to patch their differences, so to speak, then their mutually opposing differences could have resulted in a wider conflict because of the two different sides they were backing in Libya breaking out into the forefront. So what we now have essentially is this sort of two minds meeting, Erdogan and Sisi working together, possibly out of necessity, to avoid a wider conflict in Libya that could spill over into North Africa, obviously, and nobody wants that.
Do Egypt and Turkey actually have a chance of solving the Libyan crisis at this point?
That is a good question, and at this point, we don't know. But I think what is interesting right now is, I think watchers, as well as the Libyan sort of authorities and officials who've so far remained anonymous in terms of who their identities are, saying that there's a greater chance now to avoid a wider scale Libyan conflict now that Turkey and Egypt are at least beginning to work together, hopefully to avoid that sort of calamitous sort of outcome. I don't necessarily know how much that will, to what extent they can agree on and how useful the fruit of their labors will be. But it's probably better than these two leaders not doing it, not talking at all. And this could have happened years ago. The fact that Erdogan essentially chose to label the Sisi government as a dictatorship, calling him a murderer, etc., and that he would never essentially talk to him, has not helped Turkey's cause basically since 2012, right? And he's had numerous opportunities to back down from this, but he's finally come around on the Erdogan side, at least, to think that, nobody's interests are being served, least of all his. So at least this conversation starting is a positive development.
Right. Obviously, Israel's looking from the side at this kind of bargaining relationship between Egypt and Turkey. And the question is what that means for the state of Israel. Should we see ties flourish between both of these nations? Egypt, which obviously has a peace treaty with Israel, but, relations are at an all-point high tension, you could say, at this point. And obviously, Turkey and Israel have terrible relations at this point.
So, yeah, again, this is a difficult one. I mean, Turkey's position is obviously very clear. I mean, Turkey has used every opportunity to use the war in Gaza or Israel's position to sort of fight Hamas as a means to undermine and weaken Israel on the world stage. I mean, it's the only country inside of NATO and the only aspiring member of the European Union membership, right, that does not only not classify Hamas as a terrorist organization, but essentially works to enable it. I mean, Hamas exists, alive and well inside of Turkey and has active government support, whereas Egypt, as you say, is in a sort of difficult position from their perspective, simply because, yes, they have an existing sort of treaty with Israel, but as you also rightly say, that Sisi seems to be sort of hedging, or we're not quite necessarily sure how he will continue to work with Israel going forward. My estimation right now is as Erdogan probably seeks to see if he can weaken Egypt's resolve and sort of pull it away from its existing sort of treaty with Israel, and to see if it can sort of sabotage that. I'm not sure if Erdogan has any sort of sway over the Sisi administration, but simply because the Egyptian government does not trust Erdogan as far as it can throw it. So that may be Erdogan's weakest link, in the sense that Sisi may be willing to work with Erdogan.
Right.
The wider North African issues, but as far as its position towards Israel is concerned, I think Erdogan has basically no sway or pull over the Egyptian government.
All right. Well, I'd like to thank you so much for joining us. Very interesting to hear your insight. We are turning now to a very different story. Have you ever heard of dark tourism? Well, it's a bizarre trend that happens around the world where tourists travel to places associated with death and tragedy. And now southern Israel is seeing a rise in this trend. Take a look.
Each year, millions of people travel to sites around the world known as some of the unhappiest places on Earth, locations of natural disasters, atrocities, infamous deaths and accidents. And since the October 7th attack, southern Israel has found a place among counterparts like Auschwitz and the 9/11 Memorial, creating a rise in an unlikely kind of tourism.
The interest is out there. I think the potential of visitors is millions of people.
After Israel's deadliest day and worst massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust, people have been flocking to the location of the Nova Music Festival,
where 364 people were killed and 40 were taken captive to Gaza. Now the site sees dozens of visitors with many different tour groups providing guided trips to the site.
This is a period where the entry to Israel is very, very restricted. When there were more flights reaching Israel, you would have quite a few buses parked here and a lot of groups, also local groups, Israeli military forces, civilian forces, companies, and so on.
According to researchers, visiting sites of atrocities can also be a way to affirm and reproduce particular identities. Jewish tourists are using these visits as a chance to honor the victims.
Well, it's important to visit because the same reason it was important to go to Auschwitz and the same reason it was important to go to the 9/11 Memorial Museum and pay my respects to the people who lost their lives tragically and without reason, just snuffed out, true lives just snuffed out. But the difference here is that every single one of these people are my family, and I need to know.
All right, that is it for now for Middle East Now. I'm Natasha Kirchuk, and thanks for joining us.
Sale for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayazad.fr.
Techniken entweder vorsichtig ranfahren und dann bremsen und hoffen, dass die Kugel natürlich bleibt oder so bleibt oder einfach. Nein! Raus aus der Bahn ins Feld und hoffentlich alle berücksichtigen, wo der Pfeil in der zweiten Tür gleich zum Stehen kommt. Die Messung und den Punkt und dann fliegt auch schon weiter.
today's program, will Benjamin Netanyahu fire the country's defense minister in the middle of a war? There is much speculation around the Israeli prime minister's next steps, with the two men at loggerheads over the military strategy across the northern front. We bring you live updates from the ground. The Houthis say they've received a message from Yahya Sinwar thanking them for launching that ballistic missile towards central Israel on Sunday. The leader of the terror group and mastermind of the October 7th massacre is still believed to be hiding in a tunnel in Gaza. And further afield, surviving two assassination attempts in 2 months. Investigations are underway in Florida following an incident at Donald Trump's golf club on Sunday. The FBI says there was a high level of planning ahead of this attempt to target the former president. We go live to the US for the latest developments. This is the rundown. I'm Benita Levine. Hezbollah rocket fire from southern Lebanon towards northern Israel on this day, once again, as the terror group shows its solidarity with Gaza. 346 days since the Hamas terror onslaught and mass abduction in southern Israel on the 7th of October. The IDF targeting terror sites in Lebanon, with U.S. envoy Amos Hochstein back in the region today, hoping to avert a regional escalation. Meanwhile, there is much speculation that Benjamin Netanyahu is set to fire Israel's defense minister. It won't be the first time Yoav Gallant has been axed by the prime minister. Last time, the dismissal was walked back weeks later due to intense public pressure. This time round, the dispute centres around Israel's military strategy over that northern border. Correspondent Robert Swift has details in this report.
An invasion of southern Lebanon by the IDF, pushing hostile rocket launchers further north and away from Israeli towns that have been bombarded for months. This is the plan reportedly being pushed by Israel's top general commanding the northern frontier. Defense Minister Yoav Gallant and Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi are reportedly opposed to the idea, favoring a diplomatic approach to the standoff. Concerns over IDF manning levels, while combat continues in the Gaza Strip, the advantage that winter will give a guerrilla force and Hezbollah's formidable missile arsenal could be factors in their position.
The center of gravity is moving northward. Our mission here is not yet done, and that is to change the security situation and return residents to their homes.
But reports in Hebrew media suggest that not only does Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu back the establishment of a buffer zone in southern Lebanon, but that he may fire Gallant for opposing the move, replacing him with Gideon Sa'ar. The two frequently clashed over Israeli strategy in recent months, with Gallant seen as a dependable ally in Washington. In the spring of 2023, Netanyahu fired Gallant during the political upheavals around the Likud-led judicial overhaul, a move he reversed after mass street protests. It is into this latest political mess that the White House's Amos Hochstein arrives for his latest foray to Israel and Lebanon. No doubt he'll be conscious of Israel's last attempt to create a buffer zone inside the territory of its northern neighbor in 1985. While the Palestinian rocket fire was curbed, Israel found itself stuck in Lebanon for 15 years, fighting a counterinsurgency war that ultimately birthed Hezbollah.
So for the latest on the ground, we now go live to correspondent Zach Anders. He joins us from northern Israel. Red alert sirens sounding throughout the day at the Upper Galilee, and of course the IDF jets also striking Hezbollah sites in southern Lebanon. Bring us up to speed, the latest across the northern front.
Yeah, could call it a busy day, but this reflects and resembles a lot of the days we've had up here. Hezbollah claim responsibility for 10 attacks. We've seen them come all across this border. We even had a red alert at one point for Majd el-Shams, which of course raised everybody's heart rate, but was a false alarm. The 10 attacks that Hezbollah has said they've carried out, we watched one of them take place. It's interesting, spending a lot of time up here over the last, we'll call it a year now. We see the rockets often come from the north down to the south and fly overhead north to south. Well, this afternoon, as we were sitting down having dinner, we noticed that the alert came through and then looked to our right, and the rockets were coming from the west towards the east. So again, demonstrating that while this campaign in the air has lasted for a very long time, the ability of Hezbollah to still get down really close to this Israeli border with rocket launch sites and launch on the same parallel as this location here in Kiryat Shmona, on the same parallel as the Galilee Panhandle, which it should at this point go without saying, but that is remarkable that Hezbollah still has that capacity, still has rocket launchers this close to the border, perhaps reflects some of the IDF activity we saw in the air, the IDF announcing that Air Force jets were striking Hula again. That is less than a mile away from the border. I'm looking up the ridgeline. It's a stone's throw away. So to know that there's still continued Hezbollah presence, continued Hezbollah activity right there on the border, less than a mile away, really does speak volumes to where this conflict has led for the last 11 months.
And while all of this unfolds on the ground, Amos Hochstein, the U.S. envoy, is in Israel yet again. Yoav Gallant telling him the only way to return the residents of the north to their homes is by military action. And Benjamin Netanyahu just a short while ago saying it won't be possible to return residents to their homes without a fundamental change in the security situation in the north. Tell us more.
Yeah, and what I found remarkable was that while we're dissecting the strain between Gallant and the Prime Minister, that those statements read almost identical, that it will be force, essentially, is what both statements boil down to, that will change the reality here for the 60,000 plus that are evacuated, that direct confrontation with Hezbollah is going to be an eventuality, is what we are hearing. And as we speak to some of our sources, continue to hear the same things, that the military avenues are the ones that are right now becoming more and more likely, that diplomacy is slipping here as Amos Hochstein is once again in the region. Today we were on a tour that was hosted by Elnet, which is an Israeli NGO that brings in parliament members from across Europe to show them Israel, develop those kind of relationships. So there were British MPs and German ministers that were here touring the north. We stuck along on that tour with them throughout the afternoon, and we were talking a little bit about what do you see happening here, and they were surprised to see the level of fire that has destroyed parts of the north here. At one point I was talking to one of the British ministers about what could happen with the defense minister, and the comment was, well, nothing says things are going well like firing your defense minister, somebody you've already fired before, in the middle of this war. And I was saying, well, we've seen a lot of different military leaders in my perspective, U.S. end, through the global war on terror, that were relieved of their duties by certain presidents, and the response back was, yeah, and how did that war go for the Americans? And so it was a very interesting day here in the north. Again, we've been watching this continued rocket fire. No casualties reported here. That's the important part.
No doubt about that. Thank you so much for that update. More to come from our correspondent, Zach Anders, in northern Israel in the coming hours. Thank you, Zach. Stay safe. And now, for more insight, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Doron Avital, former commander in the Special Forces in the IDF, Ben Dror Yamini, senior journalist at Yediot Achronot Daily, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Much on the go, much to discuss. And Doron, I want to start with you because Yoav Gallant telling Amos Hochstein the only way to return the residents of the north to their homes is by military action. At the same time, we're hearing speculation he may be axed very soon. Your take on what's going on?
First of all, I like Gallant very much. He was the commander of the Navy SEALs when I was commander of Sayeret Matkal, and I trust his judgment. There's no question that a military campaign limited military campaign aimed at creating this buffer zone might be necessary if no other advancement can be produced, if there's no hostage deal, no ceasefire in Gaza, and then the Hochstein diplomatic efforts won't work, then this credible threat and this credible possibility has to be put on the table. I think the commander of the North, another ex-soldiers of ours, a very good one, Gordon, actually said, we are prepared and I think we can do this maneuver. Don't forget that if we enter into a military maneuver, the situation right now is different than the 7th of October. Hezbollah in the south is pretty much attacked. Many of the citizens really went to the north, so we can move more freely in terms of using our firepower. We have less constraints, so it's possible. But then, of course, it can draw the whole thing to a regional conflict and to a full-blown war. Nobody wants it, but this is the circumstances. And then you have the political quandary right now, which doesn't add up, doesn't bring a lot of comfort to the wisdom behind the decision that will be taken in the next few days or weeks.
Ben Dror, your thought on this political conundrum. Reports that Yoav Gallant may in fact be axed quite soon, potentially replaced by Gideon Sa'ar. Your thoughts on the timing? We're in the middle of a war, and as Doron is outlining, very possibly a military operation might be happening in Lebanon soon.
I have nothing to say after your question, actually. Yeah. We have a real problem with the decision-making process. I mean, what's going on? Gideon Sa'ar himself just said last March, when Yoav Gallant was fired by Netanyahu, that it's lunatic. That's how he defined it. It's lunatic to do it. I mean, now, in the middle of a war, that the upcoming war against the Hezbollah, I mean, are you crazy? What are you doing? I mean, what is your experience in security? No, you don't have any. Zero, nothing. Yes, he was education minister, but nothing to do with. Now you replace the defense minister, Mr. Netanyahu. What are you doing to us?
Well, reports at the stage, speculation at the stage. We wait to hear if it does in fact happen.
No, yeah, I'm speaking, I mean, it's much more than rumors when all the political correspondents are saying, you know, that it's going to happen. Even if even if it will not happen and he only has intentions, the meaning is that he doesn't care less about Israel. What about us? I mean, you made so many mistakes from October 7. I'm not speaking about your strategy before. I'm speaking about now. I'm speaking about the last 11 months. So what are you doing to us? I mean, the only one person that most Israelis still see as reliable, speaking about the cabinet, speaking about the government, is Yoav Gallant. So you want to kick him out? What are you doing to us, Mr. Netanyahu?
And Doron, I see that you are nodding there. What does this look like through the lens, so to speak, of Israel's enemies? So much internal division as it is, a move like this, what does it say to those who are contemplating their next move potentially on Israel?
I think it reinforces what they think. They think this is a weak society, divided at the core, divided politically, divided by public, and they think they can really shake us even more. And when they see moves like this, we shouldn't forget that Gallant is also very much in sync with the generals of the army, in sync with the U.S. in terms of the central command of the U.S. This is a guy who's here in this war for a year and more with the right experience. And to feel, you know, the famous Kissinger quote about Israel doesn't have any foreign policy, only internal politics. When they see internal politics in such a fashion, this is really disturbing, and it really gives our enemies a sense that they are on the right path, and we should really be very careful about not giving them this sense and try to reorganize our forces and create unity in terms of our armed forces for sure.
And as we are speaking right now, red alert sirens sounding in northern Israel in the community of Metula. Right now, as we are speaking, we were talking to my colleague Zach just moments ago about those tensions across that front. Ariel, it won't come as a surprise. More red alert sirens happening as we speak. And we also know the Security Cabinet is set to meet tonight after the Prime Minister wraps up all those talks with Amos Hochstein. We know some of the rhetoric, some of the outcomes of those meetings. Bring us up to speed.
Right, so this cabinet meeting that you would expect when Israel is in a time of war, there would be more frequent, but unfortunately that is not the case. It comes obviously in the wake of these meetings with Amos Hochstein, but also the Houthi strike yesterday, plans for Gaza. There is a lot to discuss, a lot of decisions to be made, and in the absence of a smaller war cabinet that made the decisions on a more frequent basis, this is the forum that Israelis are left with to make the decisions. It was supposed to be earlier today. It is possible that the political developments have pushed this meeting a little later. It is expected to take place in about 45 minutes, 9 o'clock Israel local time. And yeah, there's a lot to discuss, a lot of decisions to be made. I'm not sure that all those issues that I just mentioned will receive a resolution in this meeting tonight.
We certainly will be watching. Stay with us, gentlemen. Much more to discuss on the security front. And turning to the latest threats from the Houthis in Yemen, as Ariel was referring to, vowing more attacks following Sunday's launch of that ballistic missile towards central Israel. The Houthis also saying they received a message thanking them, and that message coming from Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, believed to be in a tunnel in Gaza. That missile was partially intercepted and shrapnel fell in parts of the country. No one was hurt. Houthi leaders celebrating the attack, claiming the technology used was created by technicians in Yemen. Today, the Iranian-backed group saying it downed a US MQ-9 drone in the Thamar province. Let's take a listen.
Our air defenses, with the help of God Almighty, successfully shot down an American MQ-9 aircraft in the skies over Thamar province, where the aircraft was conducting hostile missions. The aircraft was shot down by a locally made surface-to-air missile. This is the third aircraft to be downed within a week, and the 10th of this type that our air defenses have been able to bring down in the battle of promised victory and sacred jihad in support of Gaza.
Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia is calling for more impactful efforts to limit the supply of weapons to the Houthis, urging more than what it calls pinpoint bombings. Riyadh believes Iran has been arming the group, including with the weapons used in the attacks on commercial shipping in the Red Sea. Those attacks, of course, having a detrimental economic effect on global shipping. And our panel is still in studio. Ariel, I come straight to you. There is so much to unpack here. Let's start with that message there from the Houthis, resilient, upbeat as usual.
Not only that, but if you take into consideration their claims that they've downed so far 10 MQ-9 Reapers and MQ-9 drones, each one cost $30 million. That's $300 million cost to American forces on those drones alone. Not including all the munitions and other damage that the Houthis have caused. And you would think that this would push the Americans to a more proactive stance, more forceful position against the Houthis in their activity. Just a reminder, we aired a few months ago an interview with a former Houthi spokesperson saying a radical problem needs a radical solution. This is not Israel's or the West's problem. It's the entire world, and there needs to be a revival of the West Arab coalition as there was before 2017. Now, moving on to that message that was that the Houthis claim was received by Yahya Sinwar from Gaza. So in that message, Sinwar obviously thanking Abdul Malik al-Houthi, the leader of the Houthis, for their steadfastness alongside the Palestinian people, saying that the Hamas forces in Gaza are, quote, doing fine, and they were prepared to fight a long battle of attrition. Now, according to the Houthis, Sinwar wrote, quote, our combined efforts with our brothers in the resistance in Lebanon, Iraq, and you will help break the enemy. And this shows, if not only an aspiration for coordination between all of Iran's proxies, we're actually seeing on the ground this continuous, combined, staggered, multi-front position against Israel. This is obviously, Sinwar acknowledges this, and the Houthis as well.
Just to remind us all, we are speaking about the most primitive Arab country in the world. I've been there, by the way, in 2000. And it's just unbelievable. I mean, there is not any comparison between Yemen and the other countries. I mean, it was before the civil war, before the Houthis took over. But we are speaking about millions that are hungry, millions of children, millions among the population, because of the Houthis, because of the civil war. Now, the main damage is actually not to Israel. I mean, let's not forget it. The main damage is to Egypt because of the Suez Canal. Now they lose every day millions of dollars. This is the main damage. They don't care less. They don't care less because for them, it's not the damage for the Arab countries. It's not even the damage that they are suffering. For them, if they make the smallest damage to Israel, wow, it's a huge victory. This is the logic. We have to understand that they don't have the same kind of logic that people in the West think. Just one more comment. 2 weeks after Biden was in office, he actually cancelled and he removed out the Houthis from the terror list. What? I mean, don't you understand what you are dealing with? I mean, in their flag, they say something like death to America, death to Israel, and you take them out from the terror list. The American policy, sometimes, to say the least, is not really brilliant.
That certainly raises many questions, taking the Houthis off the list as...
Yeah, it brings in the logic of coalition that we also Israelis have to understand that really plays out here of Houthis, Iran, the question of Russia, the question of China, and then the coalition that we have in the British-American coalition that fights against the Houthis, maybe not strongly enough. Of course, we would have to react, counterattack with this attack this missile that was launched. And let's see what next, whether they can be contained in the end.
What does a counterattack to the ballistic missile launch look like?
We already have proven our ability with this attack on Hudeta, on the port, and this requires really quite a mastery to have to fly those distances and to do it in such fashion and just exactness and precision. I think we have the capabilities. We have to decide when, how, and what is the target, and I'm sure Israel would have to react. After all, it was launched against the center of Israel, and there's a context also that can affect the airport, airlines. We can't afford it. I'm sure there would be a counterattack. The question is when and how and where.
The question is when, how, and where. Gentlemen, stay with us because at the moment 101 hostages remain in captivity in Gaza. No clarity as to how many of the hostages are alive. Most of them abducted on the 7th of October during the Hamas terror rampage. Meanwhile, the IDF's 5th Brigade has been redeployed to the Netzarim corridor that splits the Gaza Strip between the north and the south. Doron Avital, why? What do you make of the move right now, the IDF in Gaza?
Well, right now we have the presence in the Philadelphia route, in the Netzarim route, and then we act upon intelligence in terms of air attack, also in terms of moving forces that on the ground. But we're still waiting to a clear strategy in terms of Gaza, whether the possibility of a hostage deal, it's hard to say it in this panel because all the time we have some hopes and then they are being dashed, whether there's still some possibility for hostage deal, but any hostage deal would end in the end with a ceasefire, and in the end of the war, we have to see whether it works out. If not, Israel would have to make a decision. What does it do with Gaza? Whether the strategy of staying on the perimeter, holding the Netzarim, holding Philadelphia, doing those raids is the only strategy that we apply. We'll have to think. I think a junction is coming.
Ariel.
Look, I visited the Philadelphia corridor in Rafah on Friday, and senior commanders on the ground who I spoke with, when I asked them, you dismantled the Rafah brigade, 80% of the tunnels along the corridor have been destroyed. What is the IDF's goal? What is the mission? And the commander reluctantly told me, in the absence of a decision by the political echelon to leave, we're here. So as long as they're still there, they're trying to maximize the achievements, and that's gaining more intelligence as to the whereabouts of hostages, and to continue to dismantle Hamas as much as they can. But the sense I got from IDF commanders on the ground is that, broadly speaking, the operation in Gaza is complete. But again, in the absence of a political decision, they're still there.
30 seconds, Ben-Dror, your sense of what all of this means for the hostages, families, of course, waiting for answers.
I mean, they're losing hope, and they know why. Right now, when we are speaking, the demonstrant in front of the house of Gideon Sa'ar that actually is following Benjamin Netanyahu. He is not willing to make the concessions that maybe Israel should. Now, many times we are speaking, and even I said concessions, but we are speaking about something that is for the benefit of Israel. Why? Why? Because this ongoing war, attrition war, it's not a real war. I mean, if we stop it, it will be the best achievement, the best victory of Israel. Because right now, when we see what's going on, we did not speak about so many countries, Western countries, that actually reconsider the security export to Israel. Last one is Germany. Germany is highly important. It's not like Canada, it's not like Britain, it's not like Italy. It's highly important. We're speaking about 30% from the security import of Israel. We have a problem, and it looks like that if Netanyahu is continuing without any hesitation to make a huge damage to Israel.
Always appreciate your insights.
Thank you.
Not optimistic insights right now. Nonetheless, we appreciate your real insights as always. Ben-Dror Yamini, thank you for being in studio. Doron and Ariel, you'll be staying with us after the break. A very quick break. When we get back, our coverage continues on The Rundown. We go live to the US, surviving 2 assassination attempts. Stay tuned.
Sale for the benefit of the victims of October 7th, 2023, supported by the Karen Hayazad. With renowned artists from all over the world on Monday, October 7th, 2024. View the complete catalog and access remote purchase orders on aspacefineart.com and Karen-Hayazad.fr.
Made This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com. This broadcast is brought to you by Israel Bonds, the most direct and impactful way to support Israel. Invest now at israelbonds.com.
Welcome back to the rundown. To Florida now. Investigations continue after Donald Trump survived a second assassination attempt in the space of 2 months. This attempt happening while the former U.S. president was at his golf club. A suspect has been detained. A rifle has been recovered. The FBI saying there was a high level of planning ahead of this attempt. More in this report by Yulia Popogailova.
The Secret Service thwarted an apparent assassination attempt on Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump while he was golfing at his West Palm Beach course in Florida. Several agents fired at a gunman armed with an AK-47 style assault rifle, who was hiding in bushes some 400 to 500 yards away from Trump.
It was 1 or 2 holes behind. That because the bubble moves through the golf course, so our agents will get there first, clear it. He noticed that the rifle was pointed out. Our agents engaged. We are not sure right now if the individual was able to take a shot at our agents, but for sure our agents were able to engage with the suspect. I don't know that. That appears so.
The suspect fled in a vehicle and was later arrested.
I wouldn't say it was extremely sophisticated, but it certainly wasn't, an amateur attempt. He had made there was some level of planning that went into this.
The suspect was identified as 58-year-old Ryan Wesley Ruth from Hawaii, according to anonymous law enforcement officials. His social media posts indicate that he voted for Trump in 2016, but was later disappointed and wrote he, quote, "will be glad when you gone." Routh also tried to recruit Afghan soldiers to fight in Ukraine and spent several months in the country.
My initial goal was to come and fight. Plan B was to come here to Kyiv and promote getting more people here. We need thousands and thousands and thousands of people here fighting with the Ukrainians.
Ruth shared COVID-19 conspiracies online and has a history of mental illness. He also shared anti-Israel posts and appears to believe Jews have no right to the Holy Land. Meanwhile, Donald Trump took to his own social media to reassure his supporters and thank the law enforcement for swift action. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris denounced the attack. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Isaac Herzog expressed relief that the attack failed and condemned political violence. The apparent attempt on Trump's life comes just 2 months after he was shot at a campaign rally in Pennsylvania, sustaining a minor injury to his right ear. With just over 7 weeks until the presidential election, the need for heightened security remains a critical concern in the polarized political climate in the United States.
So for the latest, we cross live to our senior U.S. correspondent, Mike Wagenheim. He joins us from Washington. He's outside the White House right now. So Donald Trump surviving a second assassination attempt while playing golf. Many questions about the shooter, the planning, of course, the security detail around the former president. What new details are emerging, Mike? What can you tell us?
Still a whole lot more answers than questions at this point, Benita. But Ryan Ruth was charged today in federal court, present in federal court with the pair of gun crimes. Number one, possession of a gun by a felon and possession of a gun with an obliterated serial number. There will be obviously more charges coming, but that'll hold him over for the time being as federal authorities continue to develop their case and track down any leads, which apparently are scarce for the the time being. Roth has a very documented history, a lot of criminal activity going back to his days in North Carolina, not only for possession of a weapon of mass destruction, a conviction for that, for possession of a machine gun, but various misdemeanors, tax crimes, financial issues, things of that nature. Became an activist on behalf of Ukraine, though Ukrainian authorities there say they really didn't pay him much mind as he made over-bloated promises as to what he could deliver. They say they were never really in any kind of official contact with him in terms of bringing over soldiers from Afghanistan or other places that he was promising that he could deliver. He's had a variance of political views, variance of political preferences, once a Trump fan, then a Trump critic. He's voted as a Democrat, he's voted as an unaffiliated voter, so really all across the spectrum here in terms of his political identities and his political stances here, and authorities are still trying to sort it all through and figure out exactly what led him to this assassination attempt. In terms of the Secret Service, they seem to be a bit more on the ball this time than they were during the first, it's incredible to say, during the first assassination attempt in Butler, Pennsylvania. That's what it's come to here apparently in the United States nowadays. But President Joe Biden, when asked for comment earlier today on his way to his flight out of town, said that the Secret Service needs more personnel. There will be congressional hearings coming up here to lay through exactly what needs to be done to prevent any sort of a further assassination attempts here on candidates.
Extraordinary indeed, 2 assassination attempts in 2 months. Meanwhile, Mike, Yair Lapid is in D.C., the Israeli opposition leader meeting with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. We saw a picture he'd posted a short while ago, also meeting with Antony Blinken and then with Lindsey Graham and other Republican senators, highlighting the plight of the hostages and the need for a deal to get them home. Tell us more. What's at stake? What else are they discussing?
Yair Lapid, the opposition leader, met in the building behind us here, the old Eisenhower Executive Office building, with National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan. A release from Lapid saying he's pushing Sullivan here to get a ceasefire and hostage deal done, that the time for those kidnapped and waiting in the tunnels under Gaza is running out, and it needs to be dealt with urgently. And one would presume, although nothing has come out of his meeting yet with Antony Blinken at the State Department, nor his meetings at the Capitol with various senators, but one would presume at this point that he's pushing here for more urgency on the matter. Obviously, Lapid has been a staunch critic of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in the way he has handled or not handled the matter with urgency in terms of getting a ceasefire deal done. Those attending meetings with Lapid today will certainly get an alternate version of how things are playing out there on the ground, and he'll try to change some minds in terms of the kind of pressure that he feels, Lapid feels, should be applied here to Prime Minister Netanyahu as the United States continues to press for a ceasefire and hostage deal. Lapid doesn't carry any official weight, but he does have some attention from the Democratic Party as it stands. Lapid has a history of an affiliation with Democratic leaders here in the United States, and he'll certainly try to drum a little bit more into their ears here how he feels the situation is being neglected or mishandled in Israel. Not really sure if there'll be anything that comes out of it per se in terms of action, but certainly an opportunity for his version to be heard here in Washington.
And of course, with 101 hostages in captivity in Gaza, including Americans amongst them, still no clarity as to how many hostages are alive. It's not only pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, but surely there's discussion about U.S. pressure on Qatar and, by extension, Hamas to get to some kind of a deal and get the hostages home.
Yeah, that pressure has long since faded away, it seems. There was a time period of maybe about a month, 6 weeks, where it seemed like the U.S. was cranking up, or there was at least the illusion that the U.S. was cranking up pressure on Qatar to turn up the heat on Hamas to try to get something done. There was talk about maybe a downgrade in relations between the U.S. and Qatar if something didn't come ripe and soon. that didn't last very long. It seems like the U.S. doesn't feel that there's enough leverage there, or at least doesn't feel it's worth expending for whatever reason. And so that really hasn't been an issue as of late. Of course, Israel and Israeli authorities on both sides of the political spectrum have told the United States they need to turn up the heat on Hamas, that this is not just an Israeli issue, that it's not just the prime minister holding things up. Even his opponents have said that. However, the United States really has applied more pressure on Israel than it has Hamas throughout this, and it's been a bone of contention, certainly, between the two sides as they've tried to work through what the United States says is the finer points of a hostage deal that still has yet to come to fruition.
Live from Washington, senior U.S. correspondent Mike Wagenheim updating us from outside the White House. Thank you as always. Thank you, Mike. Still with us, Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Doron Avital, former commander in the Special Forces in the IDF, and our Middle East correspondent, Ariel Oseran. And Doron, I want your take on what it's going to take to get the hostages home. Based on what we're hearing, it's all very well and good to have an opposition leader having meetings in the White House as we speak. But if there is no deal, is military pressure going to work right now? What answer does this Security Cabinet meeting later give to the families of 101 hostages?
I think it should be clear what the enemy wants, what Hamas wants. Hamas wants the end of the war. And the question is whether Israel is willing in some context, after one stage, two stages, to go into some prolonged ceasefire, which would satisfy this end of the war request of Hamas, and then come to play the day after and some option of Hamas being removed. The question with this scenario is possible, and this is right now doesn't seem so. But I think our strategy, the Israeli strategy, should be very clear. Play in sync with the Americans. If the Americans and the two moderators think there's a framework that can work, we play with them and try to impose it on Hamas. I think this is also the American strategy. I would say that in the last few weeks we were not always a very Netanyahu with the Philadelphia route, with the cabinet meeting. This didn't really help us in this fashion. We play with the U.S., what makes sense, what's the frame, and then we use the pressure on Hamas.
Well, talking about the U.S. role in this war, Benjamin Netanyahu, Ariel, after this meeting with Amos Hochstein just a short while ago, saying, while Israel appreciates and respects the support of the United States, in the end, we will do what is necessary to maintain our security. What do you read into that message right now? So much at stake, so many big decisions about to be made in the coming hours in Tel Aviv.
I think it's more of a political statement because I think Prime Minister Netanyahu thinks opposite from what Doron here said, which I agree with Doron, that you cannot, or trying to show appeasing Americans or working in tandem with the Americans as succumbing to their dictations. That's how Netanyahu's political rivals in his own coalition will frame it if he goes to a move that the Americans support and go for this deal, because Netanyahu's political allies said that if Israel leaves the Philadelphia corridor, they will leave the government. We don't even have to guess. It's all been said out in the open. And so Netanyahu's political considerations are very clear here. And it is easy to ascertain that that is what is calling the shots, because the steps don't lead to any other conclusion. The fact that the mediators, all three, are on one side, and Netanyahu has put himself at odds with them. Not only the mediators are on one side and Netanyahu is on the other regarding the Philadelphia corridor, but the military is with the Americans on this. And this is also what we discussed earlier. And so this, I don't see this as anything other than a political statement to try and better the tactic position, regardless of what decision will be made. What Israel needs at a time of war is also decisions that are dictated by security interests, and also it's best to work in cooperation with your allies, many of them who also, among them also some who support Israel militarily.
Big decisions in the coming hours we will be watching. Ariel Oseran, Middle East correspondent, and Lieutenant Colonel in the Reserves, Doron Avital, as always, appreciate your insights. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Now, further afield, today marks 2 years since the murder of Mahsa Amini, a Kurdish Iranian woman killed by Iran's morality police for not wearing her hijab properly. Her murder sparking global outrage and a months-long protest movement calling for the end of the theocratic regime in Tehran. Our Alex Schloss has a recap of those events. Let's take a look at his report.
2 years since the killing of Mahsa Amini, 2 years since the explosion of the Woman Life Freedom Movement, and 2 years since the bloody crackdown that ensued. On September 16th, 2022, Iran's morality police infamously entered the global spotlight after violently arresting 22-year-old Iranian Mahsa Amini for improperly wearing her hijab as she stepped out of the train station in Tehran. She later collapsed and died while in police custody, 5 days before her 23rd birthday. Eyewitnesses, including those detained with Amini, said she was severely beaten and died as a result.
Our findings showed, based on examination of medical documents and also of pattern evidence of the treatment of women in these situations, that Gina Mahsa Amini's death was an unlawful death, and we believe that the state is responsible.
Amini was born Mahsa Gina Amini to a Kurdish family in northwest Iran. Gina, given to her as her Kurdish name, meaning life. According to friends and family, she was a shy person who minded her own business and steered clear of politics. Shortly after her death, the streets of Iran erupted in anti-government protests, often with young women leading the charge. Some women in Iran were seen cutting their hair, burning their hijabs, while others took their protests to the global arena, competing without hijabs and voicing support for the movement dubbed Woman, Life, Freedom. Even some family members of government leaders voiced their outrage.
اکنون تمامی بشریت در این بره حساس تاریخی ناظر است که انسان‌هایی در ایران با دستان خالی و تنها با تکیه بر جان خیش و دلاوری و رشادتی مثال زدنی، من به عنوان یک زن ایرانی از تمامی انسان‌های جهان می‌خواهم که در این راستا این شیرزنان و شیرمردان را یاری کنند. برای اولین بار در طول تاریخ بشر زنان قدرت نهانی خیش را بر این جامعه مرد سالار دیکته می کنند و با شجاعت تمام نشان می دهند که جایگاه قدرت واقعی در اندیشه است، نه در بازو، و این قدرت مستقل از جنس و رنگ و نژاد است.
Government-aligned forces brutally cracked down on demonstrators, killing over 500 and detaining over 22,000 over the course of the months-long movement. Protesters remained undeterred, but the movement ultimately petered out in the spring of 2023. Since then, multiple others have been sentenced to death in closed-door trials after being accused of killing security personnel. Fast forward to today, and little has changed in the Islamic Republic of Iran, other than a new president, viewed by most as a reformist. But on the second anniversary of the killing of Mahsa Amini, Pezeshkian held his first press conference with no mention of her name, nor the mass uprising that her killing inspired. Amini's death brought a reckoning for Iran's theocratic government that continues till today, and in Tehran, women are still routinely seen without their mandatory headscarves, in protest of the law mandating them. Police have begun detaining and fining women again, but there hasn't been an incident to reignite new protests that could once again threaten the regime's control.
Now, one might not expect many tourists visiting a country during a war, but many have been coming to Israel to show their solidarity since the 7th of October. Our Jody Natilovitz has more on these trips, part of so-called dark tourism, visiting places in times of tragedy and darkness. Let's take a look.
Each year, millions of people travel to sites around the world known as some of the unhappiest places on Earth, locations of natural disasters, atrocities, infamous deaths and accidents. And since the October 7th attack, southern Israel has found a place among counterparts like Auschwitz and the 9/11 Memorial, creating a rise in an unlikely kind of tourism.
The interest is out there. I think the potential of visitors is millions of people.
After Israel's deadliest day and worst massacre of Jewish people since the Holocaust, People have been flocking to the location of the Nova Music Festival, where 364 people were killed and 40 were taken captive to Gaza. Now the site sees dozens of visitors with many different tour groups providing guided trips to the site.
This is a period where the entry to Israel is very, very restricted. When there were more flights reaching Israel, you would have quite a few buses parked here and a lot of groups, also local groups, Israeli military forces, civilian forces, companies, and so on.
According to researchers, visiting sites of atrocities can also be a way to affirm and reproduce particular identities. Jewish tourists are using these visits as a chance to honor the victims.
Well, it's important to visit because the same reason it was important to go to Auschwitz and the same reason it was important to go to the 9/11 Memorial Museum and pay my respects to the people who lost their lives tragically and without reason, just snuffed out. True lives just snuffed out. But the difference here is that every single one of these people are my family, and I need to know what happened to them.
Tour operators promise that these, quote, solidarity missions are done with reverence and respect, offering a way to raise funds and encourage support for Israel from the diaspora.
Now, in times of immense tragedy in this country, there are also countless powerful examples of the loyalty shown to those left devastated by the war. More in this report on how bonds are formed in combat and they continue long after the battlefield.
This little girl is starting her first day of school without her father, who was killed in combat in the Gaza Strip. Instead, she is accompanied by her father's tank commander, Elad Tadmor. Sergeant Major Zechariah Pesach Haber was 32 years old when his tank was attacked in Gaza. He left behind a wife and 3 children. Even while recovering from his injuries, Tadmor watched over Zechariah's wife, Talia, and their children.
So since the start of August, I knew that I want to help Talia with September 1st, to take the kids to Gan and to school. For me, it felt like not the right thing, but the only thing I can do.
For Talia, sharing what her husband's commander did felt reassuring.
Everyone around me is broken and sad and depressed. And I was like, you know what? I have something uplifting and I want to share it because this really is uplifting. And it wasn't that like the hostages are safe and healthy and back. It wasn't. It was a little story about a sweet commander stepping in for his fallen comrade and taking his kids to school. And it gave that little bit of fresh air. It gave it to me and it gave it to everybody I sent it to. And then I sent it to the first 1 or 2 people, just like, by the way, just a beautiful thing.
Talia also shares who her husband was. Zechariah posthumously received his doctorate in agronomy. He loved painting and writing songs, such as this one that celebrates the holiday of Shavuot.
את קצירה, מונים שבועות שיבה.
Professionally, he studied how to grow wheat in the desert. He was brilliant, like genuinely brilliant. Much more than normal intelligence. Like he would learn languages for fun, multiple languages, including Catalonian, Welsh, Amharic, Russian. Like really, he would learn a plethora of languages for fun. He went to the Gush for yeshiva. While he was there, he was choosing what to do in the army. He said, if everybody intelligent goes into intelligence and Modi'in, who will be in Kravi, who will be in combat? So he chose to be in combat. He had finished as a commander. Going into Miluim, he said, I don't want to be a commander in Miluim. I would rather be a loader. So he was a loader, and he loved it.
There are 2 special things that I think makes the IDF special from other armies in the world. The first one is the commander is not a guy who is above his soldiers. We're always try to be shoulder to shoulder, level-eyed with our soldiers. First of all, when I got my new soldiers in Miluim, Zechariah, Yair, and Adi, I tried my best to make a relationship and not just a connection between 2 colleagues or a commander and soldiers. And when Zechariah went home, he always sent me pictures with the kids when they eat breakfast or when he played with the kids, pillow fights or something like this. So I already felt connected, even though out the service. And while we were on a mission, the tank is a very small place. It looks big, but inside it's very intimate. To spend 18 hours together without going out. I always said that 3 months as a tank friend, you can compare it to a friendship of regular people in like 3 years.
When Talia shared the story with influencer and former Knesset member Dov Lippman, he immediately posted it.
I really felt that this is a story that people have to see during this time. So I'm thrilled that it went to hundreds of thousands of people, because that means that two things. Number one, hundreds of thousands of people were inspired in general by Tadmor, by the commander, but I also felt that it meant that hundreds of thousands of people will hear more about Zachariah, and that was important to me as well.
I just want everybody to know that I did for Zachariah what I did because he was the perfect father. It wasn't like I'm going to Miluim and it's a little bit rest from the kids. He always told me that coming back to the service, this is his rest.
Their message, the people who have passed away, is keep on going. We're here to stay, and this story is just one little tiny example that can be magnified millions of times over, that shows why we're never going to be defeated.
On Twitter, this story has been viewed more than 250,000 times, inspiring supporters of Israel and showing that, across the country, countless people are coming together to support the widows, orphans, and parents who have lost loved ones in the fighting.
And with that powerful and inspiring story, we wrap up this edition of The Rundown. I'm Benita Levine, live in Tel Aviv. Thank you for watching.